Okay, so we went through your quiz. We talked a little bit yesterday about hellbenders, Cryptobranchus elegansis, this ugly little guy. And I wanted to pick that up because I said that the North Fork of Little Beaver Creek is one of the hotbeds of hellbender activity in the world. Like, it's known by biologists. Oh, yeah. That's where they have a really good population of Cryptobranchus elegansis. And what I wanted to mention to you, because we talked about this in regards to oxygen in the water. So this is Mill Creek. It's a stream that runs from Columbiana up into Youngstown. I was the watershed coordinator for Mill Creek. Okay, yeah. A lot of people have. I mean, and it starts out, like behind a farmhouse, and it, runs in a road ditch for a while, and then it winds around the outside of town, and then it, just wanders up through a bunch of farms. Nothing special. Well, it gets down into Youngstown, and it dumps into the Mahoning River, and this is the big attraction in downtown. There's a covered bridge, there's Lanterman's Mill, there's this beautiful waterfall. But what's important when I think about this is what's at the base of that waterfall. Okay? So, who said they had a fish tank? And you got a bubbler in it, right? And what does the bubbler do? Adds oxygen. Well, guess what happens when this water pours over that waterfall? Adds oxygen. Yeah.
Do you have to have a bubbler?
You have to have some. You have to have something that will provide oxygen in the water.
I bought just a little clear tank.
Waterfall also adds oxygen to the water because it mixes it up. You've got that water bubbling and pounding at the base of the waterfall. It oxygenates the water. The areas under waterfalls tend to have high oxygen levels. Now, that's assuming that the water comes in with a normal oxygen level to begin with. Guy I know who was the naturalist, that's the nature person, the person who does all the hikes and the programs at a park. Guy who was the naturalist at Mill Creek from 62 to 1980 something, Bill Whitehouse. His office used to be right there. Great view out his window, man. I don't know how Bill ever tore himself away from the window. I don't know how he got anything done in there. He talked about, in the late 60s and early 70s, watching our little friends. Can I copy just part of that? Select, copy. The hellbenders playing in the falls, rolling around. They're called hellbenders because, especially when they're doing their reproductive activity, when they're mating, and they mate like a lot of other amphibians. This is not the sex act as you think of it. This is, he has a sperm packet, she has a bunch of eggs, and fertilization occurs outside the body. Okay? But when they're doing that, they do these twists and rolls, and they twist themselves into these horrendous, they roll over backwards and bend their spines. They bend the hell out of themselves. Hence, they're called hellbenders. I mean, that's a name that comes straight out of Appalachia. Man, see those hellbenders? Yeah, they're cool. Bill talked about seeing these guys right down in the waters at the base of the falls at Lanterman's Mill in the 70s. There's not a single hellbender in Mill Creek. Not one. There hasn't been. The last one probably died in the 70s. Oxygen levels in Mill Creek have dropped that much that even having a really pretty nice waterfall there with a pretty good drop doesn't put enough oxygen back into the water to support a population of hellbenders. They require really highly oxygenated water. They require fast water, cool water. Beaver Creek, a lot of the North Fork especially, goes through relatively undeveloped areas, like woods. What's the best thing you can have lining a creek? Woods. Trees keep the water cool water, because they shade it. Cool water can hold more oxygen than warm water. All of those trees, also their roots help filter out, what did we say helps pull oxygen out of water? Poop! The dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. So when you have septic systems that are failing and people are discharging poop into the creek, or you've got cows pooping in the creek. You've got pastures that go right over the creek, and you've got lots of fecal material coming into the creek. That fecal material feeds algae blooms. Those algae grow and then die, and as they decompose, they suck the bacteria that are decomposing them, suck the oxygen right out of the water. The North Fork of Little Beaver Creek goes mostly through woods. Where you've got woods and just woods, you don't have septic systems failing. You don't have a bunch of manicured suburban lawns getting chemlawned with extra nutrients being put on. You don't have cow pasture right down to the creek. So having a creek or a stream or a river that's flowing pretty much through what looks like wild country tends to mean you have a healthier stream, tends to mean you have higher oxygen levels. Mill Creek goes through farm fields, backyards, 2 wastewater treatment plants discharge into Mill Creek, Columbiana and Boardman. So they fish out most of the poop, but are their nutrient levels still maybe a little bit higher? Yeah. Mill Creek flows through lots of areas with suburban development where everybody's getting their lawn treated with ChemLawn, and those extra nutrients get washed off the lawn and right into the creek. And all of that means more algae, and then when those algae die, less oxygen. So the North Fork, and the North Fork has got a lot of areas that are permanently preserved, that can't ever be clear-cut logged or built on or whatever. They're protected. So, and partly that's because it's got some unusual species, and so it's really worth protecting. Does that help? Does that answer the question? Okay. So we've got a setup like this. These things have a tolerance curve, these hellbenders, that's pretty darn narrow. Okay? If we're talking about hellbender's tolerance curve for, living with oxygen levels, and actually, you know what I should say, I don't know that there's I don't know that you can ever have too much oxygen in the water. I've never heard of that. Up to the physical limits of how much oxygen you can have. Hellbenders are pretty darned happy. But man, it drops off pretty fast. They go from woohoo to and not a whole span of distance. So, in Mill Creek, as the creek got more and more polluted, as there were more and more nutrients in it, through the 70s, through the 80s, through a lot more development, through a lot more cutting of the forests that used to line the creek, as that happened, and oxygen levels dropped, they just couldn't hang on. Remember, we said, and let's go back and look at this. We said that in this green zone, everybody is growing and reproducing. Well, what happens if an entire population is living in the yellow zone? What happens to the population? What happens to the size of the population?
Decreases.
It decreases. Why? Because?
Because they can't reproduce.
Yeah, they can't reproduce. The population is shrinking. They're dying out. If some of them don't reproduce, they become extinct. So, even if you're living in the green zone, it might be okay for you. You're still able to grow. You're still able to live. But if your entire population is living in the yellow zone, rather, you're headed for doom. Doom, I say. The population can't survive because nobody's reproducing. And that's what happened to the hellbenders in Mill Creek. Now, I don't know how bad it was for them. I don't know if they were just living in the yellow, if they were really, if individuals were dying because of low oxygen levels. But the conditions certainly were not good enough for them to be reproducing. Okay, so now, so we can think about this in regards to temperature. We can think about it in regards to a lot of different things that we could mention. I'll read the slide and let you fill in the words. Organisms can either regulate their body to change their internal conditions, regulators. Examples include mammals, cats, mice, dogs, horses, etc. regulate their temperature. Or let their body conditions change along with their environment, conformers. Reptiles, such as turtles, lizards, and snakes, don't regulate their temperature. All creatures want to be in the green for all the things that they need, for temperature, for number of calories, for oxygen level. I mean, we talked about oxygen and elevation for humans. If I sent you all up to the top of Mount Everest, over the long term, you might not even survive. A lot of people actually die just of shortage of oxygen. You have what's called altitude sickness. Yes?
Have you watched Everest? It's like a movie.
I haven't, but I heard about it. I want to see it.
It's really good.
Okay, and they probably talk a little bit about altitude sickness in there. My best friend worked for many years taking teenagers. So, like, she could take a group like you out into the mountains of the western U.S. for 30 days. 30 days at a time. No tents. You slept under a tarp, open air. Rock climbing, mountaineering, so hiking up on glaciers across ice above the tree line. And one of the things that they had to be really conscious of, because up above about 9,000 feet in elevation, for reference, we're at about 1,000 feet above sea level here. So when you get up to about 9,000 feet, I forget what percentage of people will start to experience symptoms of altitude sickness. Some people, remember, human variation, we're all a little bit different. And we're different in ways you can't see. So genetically, some people at 9,000 feet above sea level will start to get headaches. I mean, everybody finds it hard to breathe at first, but some people never acclimate. At 10,000 feet, for some people, those headaches get worse. At 10 or 11,000 feet, for some people, their lungs will actually start to fill with fluid. And if you don't get them down below elevation, they die. So my friend had students on course, and they took those symptoms very, very seriously because they would have a group of 20 teenagers for 30 days, and they're responsible for their lives. And you really don't want to lose a kid on course. And so they took it very seriously. And if you were so like every morning, and her husband, because he did the same thing, would talk about his morning check-in. So how you feeling? How much water did you drink yesterday? Did you poop yesterday? How much did you eat? You know, take a deep breath for me. Because he was responsible for your life. And they talked about this. And the minute they had a kid who said, oh, I got a headache. How much water did you drink yesterday? How much did you pee yesterday? Did you poop yesterday? What did you eat yesterday? Because they're looking for other explanations for that headache. If they can't find another explanation for that headache, and they're up above 10,000 feet, they're going to start to say, okay, maybe this is the beginning of altitude sickness. And if it looked that way, they would hike that kid out. There were always two instructors on course, and if they had a kid who they suspected was beginning altitude sickness, that kid got hiked out, period. You don't mess around. So the goal for every organism is to stay in the green zone for temperature, for precipitation, for moisture, how much water you are taking in, for how many calories you're getting, for how much oxygen you're getting. Everybody wants to stay green. So what if conditions aren't allowing you to stay green? What are your options? So there are two basic ways that organisms have evolved to handle this. The first one are these regulators. And you guys are regulators. If I stick you in a walk-in cooler for a little while, or just today we just walk outside with no coats, you're cold, what are you going to start to do? Shiver. Might get goosebumps. Involuntary muscle contraction. Because your body is attempting to do everything it can to raise that temperature back up, to keep that temperature where it wants to be. Your body will start to burn fat. This is like throwing another log on the wood stove. Because your body's saying, no, we need more fire here. Your body is compensating. If you've ever watched barn cats in the winter, cats who don't live inside, and they're going to fluff up when they're sitting out in the cold. They get real fluffy. They're trapping air against their bodies, and that keeps them warmer. Same reason you get goosebumps, you just don't have fur anymore. So you don't have a nice furry coat. You've just got these little stray furs, except on your head. But, it's the same reason we get goosebumps. It's the same response as in cats and dogs. So you can regulate your body. Now, there are some species that cannot regulate their body temperature. They can't do a whole lot about their water balance. And, we mostly talk about this with like warm-blooded, cold-blooded. So, reptiles can't change their temperature. If you put a snake in the freezer, guess what happens? It dies. Don't put snakes in the freezer. It's not nice. Have I told you the story about the hamster in the freezer? Many, many years ago, they were family friends of ours, and they were traveling. This is in Germany, and they were traveling back to the States for the summer. They had flights stateside. They had a pet hamster, and they knew that this hamster was very, very old, and the kids were young, and they didn't know what to do with the hamster because they figured the hamster was really near the end of its life. Very sad. And they got advice from, I don't know who it was, I don't know if it was a vet or what, on like, what do we do with the hamster? If the hamster's going to die while we're gone, we can't have somebody coming in and feeding it and then be responsible for it dying. What do we do? And they said, well, if you want to put the hamster to sleep, sort of, just put it in the freezer. It'll go to sleep. It'll die a peaceful death. Well, so the hammer always put the hamster in the freezer. They put the little hamster in a little paper bag with some nice little pellets, figuring it would, eat a good last meal and then get real cold and real sleepy and fall asleep and never wake up. They got home 6 weeks later to find every bag of frozen vegetables in their freezer chewed through, and one very angry, very dopey, very slow-moving hamster. It was alive. So I don't know if their freezer wasn't running as cold as it should have been. I don't know if that hamster, again, with genetic variation, perhaps that was the one hamster whose ancestors had come from Siberia, and this hamster man had the tolerance for cold weather, had some genetic anomaly that made it fairly tolerant of cold weather. So this little ticked-off hamster had eaten all the frozen vegetables and was alive. I mean, was sluggish, was dopey, and they brought it out and let it warm up, and it lived for another couple months, and then it died. But that hamster was regulating its body temperature. It was eating a lot. It needed all the calories it could get because its body was rapidly burning through all of its fat reserves to keep it warm. Poor little thing. But yeah, a snake couldn't do that. A lizard couldn't do that. They don't have any mechanism for raising their internal body temperature. We talk about them as being cold-blooded. They're not really cold-blooded. They're just not able to control their body temp the way you are or that hamster is. So have you ever seen snakes out on the road on a summer afternoon? Yeah. They go out to absorb heat from the pavement. It's also a great way to get hit by a car, sadly. I always stop and move them off the road.
I caught one last summer. It was like this big.
Aww.
I kept it and then I put it because I had food. Didn't know how to
Yeah.
keep it, so
You know what? Keeping a snake for a few days is great, and then you got to let them go. But I love snakes. As a kid, I always kept them for, I kept them in a little tank out in the garage for about a week, and then I'd turn them out. But
I had a bad experience. I was getting ready for work one day. I was there over the summer.
Snakes, turtles, lizards can't control their temperature. If it gets cold, there's nothing they can do in terms of raising their body temperature. So, what are your options to stay in the green? Well, I'm glad you asked. So glad you asked. To stay in the green, organisms can also escape from conditions that make life difficult. Dormancy is a seasonal period of reduced activity. For instance, groundhogs and bears hibernate. Or organisms can migrate. Migration, seasonal movement to a better location, such as birds flying south for the winter. Okay, so dormancy. let's say you're a little groundhog. Isn't she cute? In the middle of the winter, when the plants aren't growing and they might be covered with snow, can you stay in the green zone in terms of taking in calories? You cannot find enough calories to keep yourself in the green zone. If you're out and about in the winter and you're a groundhog, you're very likely to starve to death. Same for bears. In the middle of February, in a hard winter, there is no food available. So to keep yourself in the green zone, if you can't take in the right number of calories, you have to burn a lot less calories. So these are the kind of creatures that will curl up and go into a period of reduced biological activity. They hibernate. Skunks, groundhogs, bears, squirrels, and there are some distinctions between true hibernators and things that just go dormant but they're not actually hibernating. They're burning very few calories. So they don't have to take in as many calories because they're not burning a lot just sitting here, being upright, you're burning calories. You're burning more calories sitting up than you would laying down. You're burning more calories awake than you are asleep. There's an energy cost to being awake. There's an energy cost to thinking. Thinking burns calories. If you don't have enough calories, if you're not getting enough calories, your thought process actually becomes foggy because your brain requires fuel to run all the processes. It's not like running a marathon, but it still requires energy. So if you can't get energy, you've got to burn less. So you can go dormant. In terms of animals that can't control their body temperature, like a snake. What do snakes do in the winter?
Chill out.
Chill out, yes. Where?
In my basement.
I used to have a snake basement. I loved it. So, yeah, they'll find places underground. Old farmhouse basements with big block walls, I'm betting, are fabulous because they can get in through the spaces in between the blocks. I used to get, 3 or 4 nice snakes every winter. I just let them hang out down there. I liked them.
Black snakes hanging around by the turbo heater.
Very nice. I had milk snakes and garter snakes. I never got a black snake. I was always hoping. I love black
That's all we
snakes.
get out of there. We shoot them and stuff sometimes.
Don't shoot them.
Hey,
Okay, anyway, that's a whole other conversation. No, they're not.
don't kill me.
No, they won't. Are you a rat?
They can call
Are you
me
a
out.
rodent?
Kill me.
Do you have rodent teeth? Do you have a long tail? Do you have little cute ears that go like this? Do you have long whiskers? No, you do not. Black snakes are no threat to you. So, snakes go underground where the temperature is consistent. Temperature is constantly in the mid-50s. Very often you'll get a lot of different species of snakes that will find like an old groundhog burrow or an old fox den. And they'll all crawl in there, and there will be a big mass of snakes there overwintering. If you love snakes, this sounds really cool. If they freak you out, this sounds like your worst nightmare in the stuff of horror films. They're dormant, and they've moved to a location where the temperature isn't going to change. So they've actually taken 2 forms of action. They're very sluggish. They're not hibernating, but when their body temp drops, they get real slow. They just don't have the energy to go any faster. And they kind of do that all winter.
That's me.
Well, yeah, I feel like a lot in the morning too, actually. I might be part snake. The other option is you can migrate. You can get the heck out of Dodge. So the temperature here is going to get too low for you, or you're not going to be able to meet your caloric requirements. You won't be able to take in enough energy. Go someplace where you can. And birds do this. Some bats do this. Why do I have a picture of a monarch butterfly up here? Some butterflies do. Monarch butterflies specifically. When you see a butterfly that looks like this in the late summer here, that little butterfly that you see in September is going to fly all the way to southern Mexico.
It's offspring.
it will then lay its eggs and die, and its offspring will start the journey north in the spring. Oh, that's a whole huge question. We can't even go there. It's amazing. The navigational abilities of butterflies. They think they actually partially navigate based on Earth's magnetic field. It's really cool. It's really cool stuff.
Are you gonna learn about it?
We'll try to squeeze that in because it is neat. So, you know, there are species that leave where they're at to stay in the green zone. So now, let's kind of put that whole picture together of what an individual does. We're going to talk about niche. Niche. Sounds like, and somebody said, I always think of snitches. It has nothing to do with snitches. But if that's how you remember how to pronounce it, that's fine. Niche rhymes with snitch. I'll read it and then I'll shut up. A niche is a species' way of life. This includes the range of temperature it can survive, the amount of water it needs, the types of food it can eat, or the amount of sunlight it needs to produce its own food, what other organisms eat it, what organisms it eats, when it reproduces, how it reproduces, how many offspring it usually has, and what time of day it is active. When we think about niche, you can think about this like a species job. It's what it does, and I use that distinction because a lot of people get niche confused with habitat. Habitat is where something lives. Niche is what it does. Okay? So this is where we're going to tie back to the... Remember when you picked a species early on and you created a document that was called Sydney, Copperhead, Morgan, Coyote. I don't know. I don't remember what your species are. I'm making it up. Tomorrow, when you come in, you're going to if you didn't do it yet, you need to see me to check in on that. When you come in, there's going to be a document on Classroom that's a template. You're going to copy the template over to your document, and then you're going to start filling in information about your species niche. So let's take an example. I don't think anybody in here had white-tailed deer, but you did? Okay, well, you'll have to look it all up anyway and get sources. But let's think about what a white-tailed deer's niche includes. Range of temperature it can survive. Do we have white-tailed deer in Ohio in August when it hits 100? Yeah. Do we have white-tailed deer here in February when it gets to 10 below?
Yes.
Yeah. So they have a pretty wide range of temperatures that they can survive. Do you think if we dropped a white-tailed deer off at the South Pole where it was 94 degrees below zero, they would survive? I'm guessing not, but I don't know. The hamster made it through the freezer. Poor hamster. It's got a pretty broad range for temperature, the white-tailed deer. Amount of water it needs. Do white-tailed deer live in the water? No. Do white-tailed deer live in the deserts of the Southwest? Not that I know of. I lived there. I don't know how many gallons of water or ounces of water per day a whitetail needs to survive. Somebody does, I'm sure. But, we see them drinking from streams. We know that they drink water. Type of foods it can eat. What do white-tailed deer eat? Berries, grasses, clover, dandelion, a variety of little herbivorous plants, that's soft plants like clovers and dandelions and plantains. They can eat baby trees, they can eat shrubs, they can eat corn, they can eat a lot of things. Pretty wide range of foods. Now they can't eat meat. If you give a deer raw hamburger, it can't digest it. They probably wouldn't even see it as a food source. They're not that omnivorous. Is a deer able to use sunlight to produce its own food? No, they're not photosynthetic. What other organisms eat deer? Name me one thing that eats deer. Coyotes? Humans? What else?
Bears.
Dogs. Bears will prey on baby deer. So an adult black bear can't chase down an adult deer, but adult bears will prey on little baby deer fawns. Are pretty vulnerable. They just kind of lay there to hide, and if a bear stumbles upon them, they will eat them. When do they reproduce? Do they reproduce all year? Do they have multiple? Do they have litters? What are they? Yeah, they rut in the fall. They breed they mate in the fall. Does are pregnant over the winter, and they give birth in the spring. Do deer typically have litters? Do they have one at a time? You know, these are all parts of their niche.
Sometimes two.
Yeah, usually one, occasionally twins. What time of day are they active? Oh, interesting. So I want to give you two vocabulary words you don't have. Nocturnal and diurnal. What does nocturnal mean? Night active, up all night. Okay, you are nocturnal by nature? Well, diurnal is how most humans are by nature. What does diurnal mean? It's the opposite of nocturnal.
Daylight.
Well, it's daylight active. Yeah. There's one more word here, and this is a great word. Crepuscular. Sounds like creep, like I'm creeping along. Pus, like you find in a zit, means dawn and dusk active. Deer are mostly considered crepuscular. Hey, have a wonderful day. I'll see you tomorrow.